Doctors who had to break the news. What was a reaction that stuck with you the most? Story 1. When I was a resident training in the PICU, pediatric ICU, I had a family whose 3 sons were in a horrible car crash. One thankfully walked away with only a broken arm, while the other 2 were admitted with severe injuries. I was assigned to be their primary medical provider. Thus, it became clear after a few days that one of them was going to make it through, but the other was not and was officially brain dead. I remember sitting down with the family to talk about next steps as they wanted to withdraw care. Suddenly, the mom stopped me, hugged me, and said, "It's okay. We want to donate his organs before we withdraw care." The day he was born, I just knew I had to name him Valentino, so he'd have a big heart, and now he can give that heart away to someone who needs it. I've never cried as hard as I did when they wheeled him to the OR for organ procurement. I still tear up to this day. Reply: glad the family gave others a fighting chance and made the right call for organ donation. They made a good choice for their son. Bless them and their wonderful hearts. Story 2. I have to give bad news frequently, and most people know it's coming. During my last week in residency, I had to tell a mother that her daughter was going to die. She came in talking the night before and had surgery for a life-threatening problem. We thought she would make it through, but halfway through the day, her vitals and labs took a nosedive. It became obvious that our efforts had only delayed the inevitable. She was intubated and peaceful, but she was young and had 2 small kids. We've all seen the TV drama-style screams pounding on the table, begging someone to do something, and sobbing. But when it's real, it's so much harder. Her mom was crying on the floor, asking me to take her organs to save her daughter. I'm not emotional, but that day wrecked me. I went to the bar afterward with my attending, and we didn't talk. I try not to think about it. Reply: I've had several similar times sharing bad news with parents. The pain in their faces gets burned into your memory, especially now that I have kids. You know what also killed me? I had a similar case where a young patient was almost turning around, then started to tank and was clearly going to die. I sat down to talk to the mom and explained everything. She understood, looked at me, saw the tears in my eyes I was barely holding back, hugged me, thanked me for everything, and told me it's okay. That gesture in what had to be the worst moment of her life was unbelievable. I held it together in the room, then lost it once I had a moment. Story 3. A 16-year-old girl came in. She had a rare type of childhood cancer that affected her thyroid. She managed to beat it at the time with no residual symptoms, up until she came to me at 16 years old. I'm a physical therapist for her weekly exercises. I wasn't her regular therapist. I was just filling in as a floater for the day. She mentioned how she'd recently been feeling a deep, achy bone pain at night. While assessing her, I noticed some newly formed painless lumps, nodules. Somehow this had been missed by her previous provider. After I explained what was going on, you could instantly see the click in her head. We looked at each other silently and didn't say anything. The intense emotional silence in the air was palpable. You could see the tears welling up in her eyes. She thanked me, and I referred her to her oncologist. She was diagnosed with stage 4 thyroid cancer and knew she didn't have much time left. I was 26 years old at the time and scared shitless being so new in the field. Somehow I knew exactly what to do. That memory is forever engraved in my head. Story 4. I worked in an internal medicine office and had to tell a patient that his HIV test came back positive. I asked the medical assistant to notify me as soon as he checked in for his appointment so he wouldn't have to wait long. I opened the door and he smiled and said, "I think I know what you're going to tell me." I nodded, and he put his arms out for a hug. He cried, and we hugged. That was in 2016. I've retired from the clinic since then. He connected with me on social media later. His viral load is now undetectable, and he has a new job that he loves. Story 5. I'm an ER doctor. I recently had a young lady die of a drug overdose. She was only 22. Her brother arrived as we were performing chest compressions. We had done everything, but there was no bringing her back. I asked if he wanted to be in the room when we stopped, and he said yes. His reaction was heartbreaking. He screamed and cried, then picked up her body and whispered in her ear, "I love you so much. You're my best friend." He just held her, repeatedly saying, "I love you." All the staff had to take a moment after that. I've been doing this for 8 years, and that was one of the saddest, most heartbreaking things I've ever seen. I'll never forget them. Story number 6. telling a very young patient that their cancer, which was assumed to be curable through surgery, was in fact not so because it had spread to the brain. It was a rare cancer that rarely spreads and rarely affects younger people. Some people get all the terrible luck in the world. The patient was remarkably stoic, but one of the parents lost it. The tears, wailing, pleading, and breakdown aren't anything I'll forget. The rage against the system, the accusations that I must be wrong, and then the pleading and tears again. I think it's the fact that I took their hope away from them. There is no happy ending to this story, but I'm the one who had to tell them. Years later, I can still see their faces in grief. It's burned into my memory, and it took a while to accept that perhaps trying so hard to forget would disrespect the patient's memory. I'm trained to deliver bad news and do it regularly. This one remains one of the only times where a case utterly emotionally broke me. My supervisor saw my reaction, sent me home, and told the department I'd be off for a few days. There are always those cases that stick with you forever. C'est la vie. Story number 7. As an emergency physician, I have given a lot of bad news. You expect the yells, screams, cries, punching walls, and cussing. I once told a woman and her daughter that the woman likely had advanced pancreatic cancer. They had presented for the mom having jaundice and a lump in her upper abdomen. After I told them this, after the CT scan revealed a mass on her pancreas, the daughter and mom both cried and then hugged me and thanked me. They told me that the mom had come from a country in Southeast Asia, opened a few donut shops, and raised all 4 kids, who had all been successful in their careers. That was all the mom wanted. She was glad that she got to see that. She was thankful that she had been able to do that, and that was the only thing that seemed to matter to her at that point. A few other people have also thanked me after telling them horrific news, such as the death of a family member or a new advanced cancer diagnosis. Story number 8. In my first year of being a doctor, a patient had an abrupt and very unexpected code and died shortly after we had just discussed starting a new round of chemo the next day. He was fully laughing and just hanging out with his family in the room not 30 minutes before he passed. It was the kind of experience that shakes you and makes you consider leaving medicine because you do not know if you will ever trust yourself again. I lost it and spent 15 minutes ugly crying in a stairwell before I could bring myself to go to the family waiting room and tell them. But when I got there, they said they had already figured out what had happened. They were sad, but thanked me for at least making his last day a happy one, and hugged me. I slept on the floor that night out of exhaustion. Their reaction is the only reason I was able to peel myself up in the morning and get back to work. It has been years, but I will never, ever forget it, or him. Reply. On the bright side, at least his last memories and the last memories of him would have been of him having fun with and enjoying his family's company. Imagine if he had had an argument with them or been complaining about something or virtually anything else. That would be 100 times worse. Another reply. I think about that constantly. Additional context for reference, I work in a lab. While we never did anything with COVID research, I understood a fair amount of the science. During COVID, I got a message from my ex about his uncle, who was maybe 7 years older than him and like a brother, testing positive. My ex had questions. Over a few days, I answered any questions my ex had about what they were being told, never second-guessing the doctor, just tempering expectations, dissecting the medical terms, and giving statistics. Before his uncle's second hospital transfer, they were informed that his uncle would need to be put in a medically induced coma because of his symptoms, including a fever with delirium. By this point, the general public knew the grave reality of the likelihood of coming back from this point, so the family all went to say they loved him, etc., in case this was it. The uncle apparently went off in his delirium on his stepkids, saying some unkind things about their intellectual disabilities that he never would have even thought about saying. He had treated these kids like his own flesh and blood. He eventually had a lucid moment before the coma and either was told what he had said or remembered it, but he felt so ashamed and wanted to apologize to them. Due to restrictions, they couldn't come see him, and at that time, tablets weren't in enough abundance to FaceTime. He never made it out of the coma, and I don't know if the stepkids ever forgave him to this day. I hope at some point they can forgive him and have that closure. The stepkids were the hardest part of breaking up with my ex because they told me how much they loved me every time they saw me. I think about this story constantly, and it motivates me to never leave a situation in anger. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible Reddit tales. Share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below. I love hearing from you all. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring those amazing stories.